Hello and welcome to another video. Today we'll be taking a look at Admiral Kolchaks' campaign. First up is the historical context, then Admiral Alexander Kolchak, leader of the White Forces. Next up is then objectives and strategy, key battles and campaigns, challenges and setbacks, role of foreign support, governance and policies, decline and fall, aftermath and impact, key events and timeline, cultural and literary depictions, and last up a summary of the consequences. Okay, now let's take a look at the historical context. Well, the campaign occurred during the Russian Civil War, a conflict between the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, and the White Army, the anti-Bolshevik forces. Established in Omsk, Kolchak's campaign was part of a broader effort to overthrow the Bolshevik regime and restore order in a more monarchist way with a Tsar probably. Kolchak received backing from allied powers like Britain, France and the United States, which opposed Bolshevism and supported White forces. In his book, The White Generals, an account of the White movement and the Russian Civil War, Richard Luckett provides context on the Russian Civil War and White movements. He states that amidst the chaos of civil war, Kolchak's campaign symbolized the fractured and desperate attempts to stem the tide of Bolshevik control. Next up, Admiral Alexander Kolchak, the leader of the White Forces. A distinguished naval officer, Kolchak served in the Russo-Japanese War and World War I before assuming a leadership role in the anti-Bolshevik White Army, the supreme ruler of Russia. In November of 1918, Kolchak led the White Forces in Siberia, seeking to unite anti-Bolshevik factions under his command. Kolchak envisioned a centralized autocratic government in stark contrast to the Bolshevik socialist and federalist policies. He wanted to return to a Tsarist regime. Objectives and strategies. Kolchak aimed to capture major cities such as Moscow and Petrograd to overthrow the Bolshevik regime and re-establish a unified Russian state. Focused on consolidating control over Siberia and advancing westward, leveraging the Trans-Siberian Railway for logistics and movement. He also sought to coordinate efforts with other White generals and allied forces, though internal divisions and logistical challenges hindered effectiveness. Kolchak's strategies focus on major urban centers and coordination with allies, reflecting his broader ambition to restore centralized Russian authority, says Dmitry V. Lvovich in his book White Against Red, The Life of General Anton Denikin. He explores and discusses White strategies, including Kolchak's campaign. Key battles and campaigns. Well, there was the Battle of Ufa in the March of 1919, one of the largest engagements of Kolchak's campaign, where White forces initially captured Ufa but were later pushed back by the Red Army. Kolchak's forces experienced early successes in Siberia but faced a determined Red Army counteroffensive that reversed their gains. Following a series of defeats, Kolchak's forces retreated to Omsk, which fell to the Red Army in November of 1919, marking a significant setback. The Russian Civil War by Ivan Mavtsly provides detailed account of major battles involving Kolchak's forces. He says, the initial advances of Kolchak's campaign gave way to a harsh reality as Bolshevik counteroffensives and logistical struggles took their toll. Next up, challenges and setback. Harsh Siberian winters, poor infrastructure, and extended supply lines severely hampered the movement and effectiveness of Kolchak's forces. The White movement was plagued by internal divisions and conflicting goals among different factions, undermining cohesive strategy and morale. The Red Army's superior organization, propaganda, and strategic acumen led to effective resistance and eventual dominance over White forces. Kolchak's campaign was marred by logistical nightmares and a lack of unity, which ultimately contributed to its failure, says John B. Leon. Next up, the role of foreign support. Well, they had some support from the Allies. Kolchak's campaign was supported by Allied powers, with material aid, advisors, and limited troop presence, reflecting their anti-Bolshevik stance. Despite foreign support, Allied intervention was insufficient to turn the tide in favor of Kolchak, partially due to their own war fatigue and political constraints. Kolchak's government engaged in diplomatic efforts to gain broader recognition and support, but internal white factionalism hindered cohesive action. British Intervention in the Russian Civil War is a book by Peter Kemets, and he discusses the complexities of Allied support for Kolchak and the other white forces. He states, Allied intervention provided crucial support but fell short of the decisive aid needed to sustain Kolchak's campaign against the Bolsheviks. Next up, governments and policies. Kolchak's regime was characterized by a centralized authoritarian approach with limited tolerance for dissent and a focus on military control. He also implemented measures to stabilize the economy, including currency reforms and attempts to restore pre-revolutionary property rights, though these often alienated local populations. There was also, of course, repression. Kolchak's regime faced criticism for harsh measures against perceived Bolshevik sympathizers and civilians, contributing to its declining support. Kolchak's authoritarian policies and economic measures reflected his determination to restore order but often exaggerated local opposition, says Melvin C. Smith in his book The Kolchak Administration and Siberian Society. Next up, decline and fall. The continuous advance of the Red Army forced Kolchak's forces into retreat, culminating in the loss of key territories and military resources. Increasing fragmentation among white forces and the collapse of internal support weakened Kolchak's ability to mount effective resistance. Kolchak was captured by the Bolsheviks in January 1920 and was executed in Irkutsk in February of 1920, marking the end of his campaign and a significant white defeat. Aftermath and impact. Kolchak's campaign is seen as a critical but ultimately doomed effort to challenge Bolshevik control, reflecting the broader struggles of the white movement. The harsh measures and failures of Kolchak's regime influenced Bolshevik policies in dealing with opposition and consolidating power. Kolchak remains a controversial figure with varied interpretations of his role, ranging from a patriotic leader to a flawed authoritarian. Key events and timeline. November 1918. Kolchak assumes leadership as supreme ruler of Russia and begins his campaign in Siberia. March until June 1919. Battle of Uva and subsequent campaigns marking early successes and later setbacks. November 1919. Fall of Omsk, signaling the beginning of the end for Kolchak's campaign. February 1920. Kolchak's capture and execution, ending his leadership and campaign efforts. Now, cultural and literary depictions. Kolchak's life and campaign have been depicted in various memoirs and historical accounts, reflecting his complex legacy and the broader themes of the Civil War. The campaign has been portrayed in Russian literature and films, often emphasizing the tragic and heroic aspects of Kolchak's struggle. Academic works continue to explore Kolchak's role, strategies, and the reasons behind the ultimate failure of his campaign. Now, last up, the summary of consequences. The failure of Kolchak's campaign allowed the Bolsheviks to consolidate control over Siberia and strengthen their position in the Civil War. The campaign's failure contributed to the broader decline of the white movement, paving the way for eventual Bolshevik victory and the establishment of Soviet power. Kolchak's campaign also remains a key episode in the history of the Russian Civil War, offering lessons on the challenges of anti-Bolshevik resistance and the complexities of revolutionary conflict. Thank you for listening. Bye.